With Season 23, we got changes to some exotics, one of those being Peregrine Greaves. I've seen other people in the community talking about this rework, so I thought it was finally time I give it a try. I'm both impressed and unimpressed at the same time. Let me explain. See, you can basically one-shot any mini-boss, which means when you're running any activity with a bunch of champions or tormentors, you gain a huge advantage, which left me feeling very impressed and very powerful. However, if you run any other activity that doesn't have a bunch of mini-bosses, like raids, dungeons, or seasonal activities, then you feel a bit useless. Yes, this exotic still does ramp up the damage of your shoulder charge, but it excels when you have mini-bosses, because not only are you getting over 1000% more damage, but you're also fully refunded your shoulder charge, meaning you can wipe out multiple champions back to back to back. This build offers you control over the battlefield, and the ability to basically one-shot any champion. I will be providing another build at the end of this video that will have you covered for any other activities that don't have a ton of mini-bosses. If you found this video helpful and you like seeing build videos and other Destiny 2 helpful content, leave a like on the video and consider hitting that subscribe button. With that being said, let's jump right on into it. Before we go over the subclass breakdown, I will mention there is a main gameplay loop that you will want to use. First up, our grenades will weaken targets. So in harder content like Master or Grandmaster, you'll definitely need this to be able to one-shot the champion. Second, we will get an extra 100% melee damage from our overshield. And third, we can go invisible after using a finisher. So because our shield bash requires you to be up close and personal, you can be put in harm's way, potentially losing your overshield for the extra damage or even die. So my favorite rotation is to throw my grenade at the mini boss to give it that weakening effect. Then I pop my barricade, giving me overshield and the damage buff. This will also in turn increase our grenade recharge. We then finish off a target to go invisible and rush over to the mini boss and shield bash them to insta-kill them. If you are in harder content and this doesn't insta-kill, then you can immediately hit your finisher button to finish the job. The only time I change this is for unstoppable champions. Since they take less damage when they're not stunned, I usually like to stun them before I go through this process. Now that you know how to correctly use the build, let's go over the super and the abilities. First up, for our super, I'm taking Ward of Dawn, aka Bubble. Since more than likely we'll be using this for harder content like Nightfalls, I'm going with Bubble for the extra damage and the safety. I usually try to keep my Bubble in my back pocket for if my teammate dies or I'm in a bad position. But you can also use it when it comes to a boss to do a little bit extra weapon damage. Though it doesn't stack with Well of Radiance, so if a teammate pops Well, wait until their Well is out and then pop your Bubble, or vice versa. Next up for our abilities. First up, I'm taking Rally Barricade. This has a faster recharge time, plus it gives us increased reload speed and damage range when we're behind it. And this does make it a little bit easier to stun champions or weaken an enemy for a finisher. And since we like to pop our barricade right before both of those, makes that process a little bit easier, giving you extra lines of sight. I'm also taking Shield Bash. Our exotic vastly increases the damage of Shield Bash, so it's the clear choice. And for our grenade, you have a couple options here. The main two that I like are going to be the Void Wall and the Vortex Grenade. The Void Wall does more damage and has a shorter cooldown, but it is a little bit harder to use, and you can't hit targets that are in the air. But if you do find that you're struggling to survive, you can also use the Suppressor Grenade, which is going to stun all the enemies around the mini-boss, giving you a clear path to be able to shield bash. It's mostly personal preference here, so choose whichever one fits your playstyle the best. Alright, moving on to the aspects. First up, we're taking Offensive Bulwark, and this is going to make it so that whenever we have an overshield, our grenade recharges 400% faster. But also, more importantly, our powered melees are going to deal an extra 100% damage. This, on top of the 1000% extra damage from our exotic, means our shield bashes are going to be doing immense amounts of damage. And this is going to lead to easier one-shots on mini-bosses, and in turn also give you more grenades. So then we also like to pair that with Bastion, and this is going to make our barricade grant us overshield for you and your nearby allies, pairing perfectly with Offensive Bulwark to give ourselves more survivability, more grenades, and stronger shield bashes. Alright, for our fragments. First up, Echo of Obscurity. This is going to make it so that finishers now grant you invisibility for roughly 5 seconds. This helps you safely close the gap on mini-bosses and offers you a way to pick up your teammates that are downed. This is not only going to let you pick when and where you want to use your shield bash, but also give you immensely more survivability since no enemies are going to be targeting you while you are invisible. And I also like to pair this with Echo of Cessation. This makes it so that finishers now create a burst of void damage and make nearby enemies volatile. Not only does it pair nicely with Echo of Obscurity, but we also now spawn a Void Breach whenever we're killing volatile enemies, and that's going to give us more class ability energy back. This is going to make our finishers a little bit more powerful, so not only are we going invisible, but we're also going to be causing more void damage all around the battlefield. And getting our class ability back is pretty important, since it's going to grant us overshield and more survivability. After that, I'm taking Echo of Starvation. so that whenever we pick up a Void Breach or an orb, we're granted Devour. Now we can do a finisher, become invisible, make nearby enemies volatile, and kill one of those enemies to get a Void Breach. You can pick up that Void Breach to get Devour, or with any of the numerous ways that we are going to be able to create orbs with this build, pick up one of those orbs to also get Devour. And Devour is going to give us health and grenade energy back on kills. And this is a big catalyst for staying alive in most Void builds. Finally, I'm also taking Echo of Undermining, so that Void grenades weaken targets, making them take an extra 15% more damage from all sources. This is definitely critical for harder content and making it a little bit easier to basically one-shot any mini-boss in sight. Not only that, but you can throw these grenades at any targets that are giving you a little bit of trouble, or even the boss, to give a little bit more damage to the boss with all sources. Alright, let's talk about ways to improve the build. First up are stat mods. I am going to be shooting for 100 resilience. This is not only going to give us extra damage resistance, but also make our barricade's cooldown a little bit shorter. And since our barricade is such a catalyst for this build, we do want it back as quick as possible. After that, I am shooting for roughly 80 to 100 discipline. We do get increased grenade recharge rate and more grenade energy from Devour and Overshield, so having a shorter cooldown means even more grenades, which are going to be causing weakening and making it that much easier to deal with any targets. After that, I'm also choosing roughly 50 to 60 strength. We want our shield bash up consistently for any mini boss. However, typically I try to save it until I have a mini boss to target. So we don't need a ton of strength since I don't recommend shield bashing everything in sight. But having it roughly at 50 to 60 means that if you do have to use it on another target, you will be able to get it back a little bit quicker, just in case you do run into a mini boss. All of our other stats I'm going to pump into recovery. Since we have ways to gain health, overshield, and go invisible, recovery isn't as necessary as it is with other builds. So focus on your abilities first, and then pump the rest into recovery. Alright, taking a look at our armor mods. First up for our helmet mods, I'm going to take Harmonic Siphon. This is going to make it so that rapid kills with a void weapon is going to create an orb. I do like to run void weapons with this build, so it's going to make it a little bit easier to create orbs. But I also like to pair this with either Kinetic, Strand, or Stasis Siphon. Whatever our primary slot weapon is going to be, I want to be able to have the option to create orbs with both my primary and my secondary weapon. So match it up to the weapons you have, because creating orbs is going to make this build so much easier to use. And finally, I like to take a heavy ammo finder, just to have the increased heavy ammo drop rates. Alright, for our arms, first up, I'm taking heavy-handed. Our melees are super strong, so now we can use them to generate orbs. Plus, with offensive bulwark, when we have our overshield, our normal melee counts as a powered melee. There still is a 10-second cooldown in between creating orbs, but this does offer us another way to generate even more orbs. I'm also going to pair this with momentum transfer, which is going to grant us 12% melee ability energy when we damage with our grenade. Since we have so many ways to get our grenade back, I usually like to use this in case I do have to use a shield bash on a target that isn't a mini boss. Since mini bosses will immediately refund our shield bash, it's not super important, but when you don't have that shield bash and you do run into a mini boss, you definitely are going to want to have it up. So having the ability to gain back even more melee ability energy with our grenades, which we can basically constantly throw, is going to be pretty helpful. And after that, I like to take Focusing Strike, which is going to grant us 12% class ability energy whenever we damage with our melee. We should be using our melee after our barricade, so it's nice to have that bump in our class ability energy right after we use it. Alright, moving on to the chest mods. We are going to take 3 resistance mods, as per usual. Since we are trying to run this in harder content, having 3 resistance mods is pretty much necessary. It's hard to tell you what exactly you should use, but basically match it up to the elements that you will be facing. If there is a threat, you can pretty much negate it by using 2 of the same element. Alright, moving on to our legs. First up, I'm taking Invigoration, so that orbs will now give us 10% melee energy back. Since we don't have a ton of ways to get our melee back, this helps it if we do need to use our shield bash on something other than a mini boss. So now we can use our grenades to get more melee energy, as well as whenever we are picking up orbs, we are getting more melee energy back. So this does mean that you can use it a little bit more freely, but I still like to hold it if I can for any champions or mini bosses that I see. After that, I'm also taking Absolution, so that we're granted 5% ability energy for all of our abilities when we're picking up an orb. And I'm also going to pair that with Orbs of Restoration. And what I love about Orbs of Restoration is that it gives 10% ability energy back to the ability that has the least energy. With this build, we want our grenade, we want our barricade, and we want our melee. So having Absolution to give a flat 5% across all means that you can get a small bump in all of them. But sometimes you are going to run into the option where you have 2 of your abilities charged. And in that case, Orbs of Restoration is going to be even more impressive. giving us back 10% just to that one ability. And this now means that we are getting an extra 10% to any of our abilities, 5% to all of them, and 10% to our melee specifically, just by picking up orbs. This is why it's so critical to have both siphon mods on your helmet so that you can generate orbs with ease. Alright, moving on to the mark. First up, I'm taking Reaper. This means that after we use our barricade, our next weapon kill will grant an orb. There is a 10-second cooldown, and normally we do like to use our barricade and then use our shield bash, but there are plenty of times that you can just use your barricade and there's no mini bosses around. This is not only going to give you extra safety, but also when you use those weapons, you'll immediately create one orb, and if you get a rapid kill and get another one, you'll create another orb, feeding more ability energy back to you and helping out your team. After that, I also like Proximity Ward. So this is now going to give you a 200% overshield when you're performing a finisher. This only lasts while you're in the finisher, but it does make that finisher even more safe. And since sometimes you are trying to use this to go res a teammate or something like that, you can use this to perform a safe finisher, go invisible, and pick up any teammates that are downed and or shield bash your mini boss. And I also like to pair this with Bulwark Finisher, so that finishing enemy when you have 3 or more armor charge will give you a void overshield, meaning that if you don't have your barricade, but you do have at least 3 armor charge, you can easily gain an overshield for your melee, giving it that increased 100% more damage. And since I do like to do a decent amount of finishers with this build, having extra overshield is just nice to have, since we are getting increased health, increased damage resistance, and more grenade recharge. Alright, for the artifact, there's not really much to say. None of the artifact mods are about void, so pick whichever ones apply to your situation. Alright, let's talk about weapons. Since this build is a bit more about abilities, you have a bit of free range when it comes to weapons. Some good options will include disorienting grenade launchers for extra safety, wave frame grenade launchers for extra ad clear, or any weapons that will stun champions so that you can safely shield bash them. The new exotic crossbow, Buried Bloodline, from the new dungeon is also a great option. I don't have the catalyst yet, but if you do, then you can weaken targets whenever you have Devour, which is pretty much 100% of the time. And in that case, I might not even use Echo of Undermining, since we can use our sidearm to create that weakening effect, and that'll allow you to use a different fragment and not take away 20 discipline from your build. You could also take a weapon with Repulsor Brace. This will mainly be to gain more overshield. Since we can make targets weak with our grenades and volatile with finishers, this should be pretty easy to proc, though it seems to be a bit finicky right now. I was struggling a little bit to proc it when in the past it's been a little bit easier, so just be aware that right now it might be a little bit bugged. This build offers you the ability to one-shot any mini-boss by ramping up your shoulder charge to over 2,000% more damage, allowing you to run through any Nightfall with ease. You gain control over the battlefield by finishing targets to gain invisibility and spread volatility. Health and overshield are easily gained through Devour and your barricade. You can throw a ton of grenades by keeping up your overshield and killing targets. This is a fantastic build for activities with mini-bosses. But if you are wanting to run an activity with minimal mini-bosses, check out my previous Void build, which allows you to ramp up your weapon damage and allow you to mow down any targets in sight. Well, there you have it. A new Void build that excels at eliminating champions, tormentors, and mini-bosses alike. Let me know in the comments, what would you change or how would you improve it? That's it for me. Peace out.